Look at the Aurelian walls. 12 miles of brick and concrete, originally built in the 3rd century to protect the undisputed center of the known world. From a distance, in the dim light of dawn, Rome still looks like an empire. It looks eternal. But as we cross the threshold of the gates in the year 800 AD, the illusion shatters. This is not the Rome of marble, emperors, and a million bustling citizens. The Rome of 800 AD is a ghost ship. It is an empty shell, a colossal theatrical stage where the actors have long since abandoned the play. From its peak population of over 1 million during the reign of Trajan, historical demographic surveys and archaeological surveys estimate that fewer than 40,000 people remain. Let that number sink in. Over 95% of the population has vanished. If you were to walk through the gates of Rome in this century, you would not find a sprawling, continuous urban metropolis. Instead, the area inside the walls is described by historians as the disabitato, the uninhabited zone. You would find yourself walking through dense woodlands, overgrown vineyards, and muddy sheep pastures. The surviving Romans have huddled together, abandoning the grand hills of their ancestors, clinging desperately to a tiny bend in the Tiber River. How did the capital of the world become a rural village? It did not happen overnight. Rome did not vanish in a single cataclysmic day of fire and brimstone. It slowly suffocated, and the murder weapon was the destruction of its most vital organ, its water infrastructure. Ancient Rome was powered by water. 11 massive aqueducts, marvels of ancient engineering, delivered hundreds of millions of gallons of fresh water daily. This water fueled the monumental public bathhouses, the fountains, the latrines, and the sheer density of human life. Without it, the city was unsustainable. The fatal blow was struck in 537 AD during the Gothic War. The Ostrogothic king Vitiges besieged the city. To break the Romans, he utilized a brutal but effective strategy. He ordered his armies to cut the aqueducts. Historical consensus marks this moment as the true death of ancient Rome. While the empire technically continued, the city's infrastructure was paralyzed. The grand baths of Caracalla and Diocletian, structures so massive they looked like mountains of brick, were drained dry and became useless overnight. The sophisticated plumbing failed. Crucially, the higher elevations of the city, the famous Palatine, Aventine, and Caelian hills, became fundamentally unlivable. Without pressurized water reaching the summits, carrying enough water by hand for thousands of people was physically impossible. Therefore, the population was forced to migrate. Archaeological records show a massive abandonment of the hills. The remaining citizens moved down into the Campus Martius, the low-lying, flood-prone plain next to the Tiber River. The river became their absolute lifeline. It was their only source of drinking water, their public bath, and their sewer. But the broken aqueducts outside the city created a new, insidious terror. The water that once flowed cleanly into the city now poured out into the surrounding countryside, transforming the Campagna into a vast, stagnant swamp. This birthed an enemy far deadlier than any Gothic army. The swamps became breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Medieval chronicles frequently mentioned the Roman fever, what we now know as malaria. It became endemic. The city, already crippled by war and starvation, was now trapped in a cycle of disease. The remaining inhabitants were physically isolated, locked inside a gigantic fortress of walls, surrounded by a malarial wasteland that made travel and trade perilous. They were survivors, living inside the carcass of a giant. And to survive, they had to adapt. They could not afford to revere the monuments around them. They had to use them.
To the modern eye, the Roman Forum is a sacred archaeological site. But to a Roman in the year 800 AD, it was something entirely different: a quarry and a cow pasture. Centuries of catastrophic flooding from the untamed Tiber River, combined with a total lack of municipal maintenance, had deposited thick layers of silt and mud over the ancient paving stones. The ground level literally rose, swallowing the bases of triumphant arches and monumental columns.
By the 9th century, this epicenter of global politics was informally known as the Campo Vaccino, the Field of Cows. Where senators once debated the fate of empires, shepherds now grazed their livestock among the crumbling temples. But the ruins served a much more violent, practical purpose. The surviving population looked at the marble statues, the travertine facades, and the vast basilicas not as art, but as raw building materials. They systematically cannibalized their own history. Across the city, kilns known as calcare were constantly burning. Workers stripped pristine marble from the temples of gods and emperors, smashing the priceless stone into pieces and roasting it in these kilns to produce quicklime. This lime was mixed with sand to create the crude mortar used to patch up their modest homes and build new medieval churches. The classical city was literally being burned alive to cement the medieval one. And then there is the Colosseum, the Flavian amphitheater, once echoing with the roar of 50,000 spectators and the blood of gladiators, stood silent. But it was not empty. Archaeological excavations reveal that by the early medieval period, the Colosseum had been entirely repurposed. The arena floor, once soaked in blood, was filled in with dirt. The labyrinth of subterranean tunnels became a cemetery, housing the dead of the impoverished local community. The vaulted arcades and seating tiers were walled up with mud, brick, and scavenged stone. They became workshops for blacksmiths, stables for animals, and fortified apartments for normal families. The Colosseum was no longer an arena. It was a massive, self-contained medieval village built into the skeleton of a giant. It provided shelter, high walls for defense against bandits, and endless stone for the taking.
To survive in the Rome of 800 AD, you had to stay close to the water. With the aqueducts dead, the remaining population abandoned the dry hills and clustered in the Campus Martius, the low-lying floodplain nestled in the sharp bend of the Tiber River.
The Tiber became the absolute center of gravity. It was the only source of drinking water, the public bath, and the primary mechanism for waste disposal. But relying on the river came at a horrific cost. The ancient Roman sanitation system, including the legendary Great Sewer, the Cloaca Maxima, had largely failed. Historical and geological records show that without the constant pressurized flow of aqueduct water to flush them out, the ancient subterranean sewers clogged with centuries of silt, garbage, and debris. Waste flowed openly into the river, right where citizens drew their daily water. Waterborne diseases and dysentery were constant companions. Furthermore, the river was deeply unpredictable.
Without the Roman Empire's organized administration to dredge the riverbed or maintain the protective embankments, the Tiber frequently overflowed. Medieval chronicles document devastating winter floods that would submerge the inhabited zones, leaving behind thick layers of foul mud and accelerating the spread of malaria from the stagnant pools. Survival also meant feeding yourself. The ancient system of the cura annone, the massive state-subsidized grain fleets from Egypt and North Africa, had vanished centuries ago. Rome was cut off from the global Mediterranean trade networks. It had to become self-sufficient. The vast, empty spaces inside the Aurelian walls transformed into a bizarre urban farm. Where grand imperial villas and public squares once stood, there were now sprawling wheat fields, vegetable gardens, and vineyards. The diet shifted from imported exotic goods to harsh local subsistence: coarse dark bread, cabbage, onions, river fish, and occasional meat from pigs that scavenged the ruins. The old masters of Rome were gone. The Palatine Hill, where Augustus, Nero, and Trajan once ruled the known world, had become a crumbling, overgrown labyrinth of brick. Nature had reclaimed the throne rooms. The secular state had completely evaporated. But a city cannot survive in a vacuum. Without an emperor, without the ancient Senate, and without the legions to maintain order, a new power structure emerged from the ruins. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, stepped into the void. The Church effectively became the new state. Archaeology and papal registries confirmed that the Church took over the city's critical administration. They established diaconiae, welfare centers, often built directly inside repurposed pagan temples and public halls. The papacy managed the remaining grain supply, funded orphanages, and maintained the few functional baths and hospitals. To the average Roman struggling in the mud of the Campus Martius, the Pope was not merely a distant spiritual figurehead. He was the landlord, the magistrate, and the sole provider of daily bread. Rome had shifted from a military empire to a theocracy. And this brings us to the exact year of our journey, 800 AD, a year that permanently redefined Rome's place in the world. In Christmas Day, inside the dim, candle-lit nave of Old St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo III made a geopolitical move that shocked the world. He crowned Charlemagne, the king of the Franks, as the emperor of the Romans. By doing this, the papacy officially turned its back on the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople, tying Rome's ultimate fate to the rising, unpolished powers of Northern Europe. Rome was no longer the political capital of an empire. Its legions were dust. Its emperors were history. But on that winter day in 800 AD, it successfully reinvented itself as the undisputed spiritual capital of Western Christendom. But the transformation of Rome wasn't just happening on the surface. It was happening deep underground. For centuries, the vast network of catacombs outside the Aurelian walls had been the sacred, undisturbed resting place of early Christians and martyrs. By the 8th and 9th centuries, the Roman Campania, the countryside surrounding the city, was completely lawless, deserted, and increasingly vulnerable to raids from Lombards and Saracens. The tombs were being plundered by tomb robbers seeking gold and holy relics. To protect these sacred remains, the popes made a radical and unprecedented decision. They ordered the greatest exhumation in history. Cartloads of bones were hauled out of the dark suburban tunnels and brought inside the safety of the city walls. They were deposited beneath the altars of the newly rising churches. The dead were literally moving in with the living. Rome became a giant, fortified reliquary. It was a city defined no longer by its living population, which was a mere fraction of its former glory, but by the immense power of the sacred bones it guarded. The Rome of 800 AD was not a tragedy. It was a masterpiece of human survival. The classical world had to die so the medieval world could be born. The marble shattered, the aqueducts ran dry, and the invincible emperors faded into myth and dust. But the people endured. They built their homes in the rotting skeletons of giants, drank from the muddy waters of the Tiber, and from the ashes of the greatest collapse in human history, they forged a new era. Thank you for traveling with us. Here at Vivid Past, we bring history back from the dead. If you want to witness the true, unfiltered reality of the world we lost, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and tell us in the comments, what forgotten city should we reconstruct next?